If you want to feel the wind blowing through your hair and see the great city of Nashville at the same time, check out Nashville Scooter Tours. Trekking through the downtown streets to Music Row with Nashville Scooter Tours is safe, eco-friendly, and a whole lot of fun. They use Xenon electric scooters that go 55 miles on a single charge. Find out more by calling 615-290-5563 or book your reservation today at NashvilleScooterTours.com.
Talkapolis, the social media TV network for your city.
Welcome back, everybody, to the final segment today of Political Soup. This is the one and only great CROM Carmichael. I'm just
you know how much I pay you to say that. It's just more than I can possibly stand.
I was going to say, my banker's still looking. I am just the talking head, Joe Williams. As we wrap this up, I think we're both. We've covered a couple of things that just I sit back and just shake my head and go, really? And I think we're going to close out in many ways the same way because, CROM, you talk about knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. You always hear me scream about common sense and unintended consequences, and I'll be doggone if we don't have another example as we follow up on a couple of things that we've talked about before. Specifically, let's talk a little bit more about the Affordable Health Care Act, better known as OBAMACARE, and the latest unintended consequence that has leapt from one of the 30,000 or so pages of bill and regulation.
This is a great article about, as you say, the law of unintended consequences. In Obamacare, buried in the legislation, is a section that says to hospitals, if you readmit a patient within 30 days of their being discharged, then that's your fault, because the assumption there is that you did a lousy job when they were in the first time, and so therefore we're going to deduct revenue that we're paying you if that patient has to come back.
Right.
Now, the underlying assumption is, which is the knowledge part, the underlying assumption is hospitals, if they do a good job the first time, they won't have to readmit, okay? The human body is not like an automobile. If you go in and get a car repair, and then within 30 days you have to bring the car back to be repaired again for the same thing,
right,
chances are the car dealer was at fault.
And didn't get it right the first time.
And didn't get it right the first time and needs to do it the second time for nothing.
Right.
But the human body isn't like a car. And the Obama administration likes to use cars as his metaphor. And so do the people who work in Obamacare.
Cash for clunkers.
Yeah, well, but I'm just talking about the metaphor for health care.
I'm talking about my body being a clunker.
All right. Oh. Okay. All right. Well, what they've done is they've now done a study and found that 75% of readmits have nothing to do with the first problem. That what you have is the elderly and the very poor tend to be in bad health, and so they're going to become more chronic in terms of their health care needs. Now, here's what happens, though, the law of unintended consequences. If a hospital keeps a patient in the emergency room and not admit them to the hospital, then if they discharge somebody directly from the emergency room, then they've never been, it's not an admission, so it doesn't count against them. But emergency room care over time is a bad place to be. The health care in the emergency room is bad, and it's incredibly expensive.
I was going to say, wait a minute, now you've got the expense side of this.
Yeah, so you have two bad results from what was intended to be a wise policy.
Now, here's my other question for you. I'm going to stop you there because typically, when you wind up readmitted for the same issue, your doctor looks at you and says, you know, I probably should have kept you a day longer or a day and a half longer, but the requirement was, you know, it's this procedure, it's a 2-day deal, and we don't care their complications. They leave in 2 days. Well, if I'd have kept you 3, if you'd had another day of intravenous antibiotics, for example, we wouldn't be here 21 days later. But no, they forced me to discharge you. Now I'm going to get popped because they didn't follow my recommendation to begin with, and now you're back.
Yeah, and a doctor can jump through a bunch of hoops if they want to keep one more day, but that also puts a lot of their payment at risk too. But here's what's also interesting, and this once again gets to We want to have a healthcare system that takes care of the truly needy, those who can't afford it.
Correct.
But the populations of the truly needy tend to exist in relatively tight communities.
Correct.
The hospitals that serve those communities are the ones that are under the most financial stress to begin with, because almost all of their patients are either Medicaid or Medicare, which are the government-funded programs that Obamacare says, if you readmit after 30 days, I'm going to cut what you're getting. But they're already under financial stress. And so what Obamacare is purported to do, which is to help as many people as possible, especially the lower income people and the ones who are the most fragile, it's actually going to do the opposite, because it's going to end up forcing a lot of these hospitals to either play games with the system, which drives up the cost and weakens healthcare by keeping people in the emergency room, or reduce the payments to them and therefore causing them to either offer poor service or close altogether. And so once again, what you have is, this is a really interesting, let me just quote this. Our recent nationwide study at Harvard Medical School found that Medicare penalties for hospital infections deemed preventable failed to reduce infections. Instead, the penalties contributed to misleading coding to give the appearance of fewer infections. What's more, numerous studies have shown that paying doctors extra money for individual quality metrics like treating high blood pressure rarely, if ever, work. Now, here's what's so fascinating about this. Who are the people who are trying to design the healthcare policies that affect every human being in this country? Non-healthcare professionals. Yep. It's a bunch of damn politicians and a bunch of special interest group all trying to get their money, their hand in your pocket. And Medicaid now is $10,000 a person. $10,000 a person. Let me say that again. So a family of four, on average, is $40,000 compared to what we're paying for health care. So that is the government-run plan that's the single-payer plan. Won't work. Let's look at the facts. Let's be wise about this before it just destroys us. Obamacare was a disastrous piece of legislation, poorly written, poorly enacted, and we are, as Democrats are now acknowledging, we're going to have a train wreck.
Well, and I don't mean to scare anybody, because I know my initial reaction when I heard this a couple of years ago is, no, that'll never happen. But you remember there was an argument of, I think the extreme was called the death committees. What now stops someone from making the decision, you know what, if we just leave them in the emergency room, if we just let them be comfortable, yeah, we could save and extend, but if we don't readmit them. Yeah, I know that sounds crazy. I know what I'm saying here, and I know it sounds crazy, but I got to tell you, it's in the back of my mind.
Well,
somebody's making a decision on whose life is
what
more
you
valuable.
have is you have government bureaucrats slotting everything. And if you've ever dealt with a government bureaucrat, and by the way, I'm not saying all government bureaucrats are wrong. I'm simply saying that they're told, if this is the color of blue, then this is the color of blue. And somebody brings you this pen and says, but this pen is black. And you say, well, no. According to the definition, that pen is blue. Therefore, it fits here. And you say, well, it actually is black. It ought to be over here. And the bureaucrat says, I'm sorry. I have my regulations I have to live with. It is blue. And so this is what's going to happen in healthcare, and that you're going to have a bureaucratically driven system rather than a patient-doctor. And by the way, the only way you end up with a patient-doctor system is that the patient has to be in charge of the payments. You can insure for that. You can create ways so that people can afford to pay for their health care, but the decision needs to be between the patient and the doctor, and there needs to be pressure on the patient financially to help to work with the doctor to make the best decision under the circumstances. And that's the opposite, unfortunately, that is the opposite of what Obamacare is doing, because Obamacare thinks your body is like a car.
You know what this does do, though? This opens up a wave, a door for a wave of new attorneys to come get their hooks in.
Well, that's another subject that just kind of popped up that I think is something we've talked about in the past. But here's what's interesting. This article says law schools are under siege. Applications have dropped to around 54,000 annually from 100,000 in just 2004. So in 10 years, the number of people who are applying for law school is down 50%. Now, on balance, I think this country could do with a lot less lawyers, and so I think that's good. So having said that, now I'm not saying all lawyers are bad.
I know.
But we got too many of them,
Yeah.
and too much of a good thing. You know, if you take a bite of a really nice chocolate, that tastes really good. But if you eat true story, got a friend of mine whose wife was pregnant. He comes home one day from work, and his wife is laying on the kitchen table with a lemon meringue pie with a slice out of it. And she is boo-hooing. She's crying, and she's pregnant. And she's crying, and the husband says, honey, what's wrong? And she says, look what I've eaten. And he says, well, honey, you only ate one slice. That's not that bad. She says, it's the second pie today. And so I say that only to say, you know, one slice of pie, there are need for some lawyers, but we don't need to have the second pie today.
I was going to say, be real careful whose big toes you might be stepping on here.
So what this article is talking about, though, is how the mega law firms with the super important lawyers, the charging immense fees, by the way, and they charge it to really rich corporations and rich individuals, and they're able to charge that amount of money because they're trying to help the big rich corporations and the rich individuals comply with all the government regulations. And what this article is saying is that the companies like LegalZoom and these other consumer-driven legal sites where you can go and just download a contract, that's killing the small lawyer business. But the lawyer business that's thriving is the big law firms, and it's saying in here that some of these law firms where the partners draw multi-million-dollar salaries a year, the partners, one of them says pardoners drew a staggering $7 million per year. So here's what's interesting, though. How are they making all that money? They're helping people comply with Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and a bunch of other tax codes and a bunch of other really stupid pieces of legislation passed by Congress that are so complicated and so burdensome that the risk of falling afoul of a regulation that you don't even understand is so great that you're willing to pay immense legal fees. Sure. Now, so what that does is it hurts your shareholders, it hurts your customers, or it hurts your employees, and it benefits a bunch of very, very wealthy lawyers. So, what's the takeaway here? What's our end game? Our end game is recognizing that we have some really bad, costly legislation that we need to do away with, and that helps the average person. It may hurt the rich lawyer, but that's okay. They can be hurt. It helps a multitude of average people.
You know what I'd really love to see? The firm that had the $7 million bonus at the top. I would love to see the average and the median.
Boy,
for the top partner and the first-year associate. Wouldn't you love to see the differences
or even
there?
the employees. Count all the employees in the law
paralegals.
firm. Yes.
No. That would be ugly.
That's a great point.
That would be ugly. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Political Soup. CROM, thank you so much. As always, insightful. I think we got some knowledge, some understanding, and hopefully some wisdom out of this.
Well, enjoy today.
It's been good. We'll see you back
next week.
We say next week.
Next week.
Next week could be tomorrow for us. You never know. For CROM Carmichael, I'm Joe Williams. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on Political Soup. We hope you'll come back and see us again. Have a great week.